Who's going to pray for us? Thank you very much. Bow your heads, please.
Our Father in heaven, thank you for this time that we can all come here to learn about science and what you created, and thank you for keeping Miss Katie Brady safe on the way down here. And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, the stuff we're going to do today, I really like, because I really like coral reefs. So, and we're studying other stuff too, but there's a lot for us to go through today. So let's start by turning back to page 302. I know that's in the previous couple chapters, but that was the map that actually showed us the natural communities on the continental shelf that surround Florida. So look at the bottom of page 302. And hopefully all of you drew that map into your workbook. And so we've already looked at the bottoms that were made up of sediments, and we've already looked at, last week we looked at the so the mineral-based bottoms was first, then the plant-based bottoms. Last week we looked at the seagrass beds, and we talked about the algae, which is seaweed, that's the word. And so today we're looking at the animal-based reefs. Particularly, we're going to focus in on the coral reefs. We are going to mention the sponges also, but we're going to focus in on the corals today. And we talked a little bit before about the Oculina banks, which is a form of coral reef, but that's way out and it's deep. So even though fishermen use it, most people aren't diving on it like they do on the coral reefs, the tropical coral reefs. And then we talked about the vermitid reefs and the worm reefs before, but we're not going to focus in on those today because even though those are animal reefs, they're just not as much fun, are they? And so we'll go ahead and focus more on the sponges and the corals today. So let's go ahead and turn to today's lesson, which is on page 333. On page 333. So we're looking at the animal communities that are on the continental shelf. And I don't know about you, but if I wasn't a scientist and somebody told me that was an animal, I'd go, don't look like an animal to me. Well, what about that? But these are animal skeletons, aren't they? These are actual animal skeletons. So the first thing, and we'll look at these more in just a minute, the first thing that we need to realize is, well, how are we defining a plant or an animal? And I mentioned to you in your reading in your workbook that there were actually 5 kingdoms that they classify what God made as far as living things into. Now, does that mean God made 5 kingdoms? No. It means man classifies all the cool stuff God made into these 5 kingdoms. And I told you before, classifying things is like putting your clothes away and folding them up and putting them away in specific places so that you can go back and find them later easily. We did talk about that, right? Okay. So remember, that's how we classify things. Well, biologists like to classify living things into these 5 kingdoms. One of the kingdoms is the animal kingdom. And I mentioned to you all 5 kingdoms in your reading, but let's just focus in right now. Let's do 3 of them real quickly. The animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the other one is called Protista. The 2 other ones are Monera, which is bacteria, and fungi, which is funguses, like mushrooms and yeast and stuff like that. Protista, the only reason I'm going to bother to mention it is Protista are the plankton. Your phytoplankton, which are little plants like algae, that's Protista. Your little animal plankton that are little animals that are cruising around but they're microscopic, those are in Protista because Protista are single cellular usually. Seaweed is stuffed here too because of the single cellular algae, but this is where those things go. So now I'm done with that. We're not going to play with that more than just that that's where plankton are classified. But this one I want you to see the difference because, like I said, if somebody when I was your age told me that a coral was an animal, I would have laughed in their face. I said, no, it's a rock. You know, being from Miami, that's where my brain would have immediately gone, is all the coral rock that I've picked out of my knees from bike accidents and stuff. I would have never thought of it as an animal. And so we need to know how we're defining plants and animals. And sponges, let's be honest, my extent of sponges really was like washing the dishes and stuff. So I wouldn't have thought of that as an animal either. So A plant, both of these are multicellular, which means you should be able to see them with the naked eye, first off. Second off, because they're multicellular, they have a particular type of cells that are very cool called eukaryotic cells, but we'll torture you with that later, okay? But the real designation between these two, so that you can tell what a plant or an animal is, because you already know it's multicellular, which means you can see it without a microscope, is that plants make their own food. Remember photosynthesis? Plants make their own food. Animals don't. Animals have to eat somebody else or something else. If you count plants as somebody, then they have to eat somebody else. Okay? So animals have to get their food from eating something else. Plants photosynthesize and they make their own food. Does everybody see the distinction? Now, if we use that as our distinction between what's a plant or an animal, then you think about a live sponge, and it's definitely an animal, because a live sponge does not photosynthesize. How does a live sponge eat? You read about it, yes.
Filter feeder?
Good. It's a filter feeder. And so I have a few different examples, which I held up a minute ago, but I have a few different examples of some sponges. I want you to be aware I did not go pull these out of the bottom. These actually, most of these come from Delray Beach after a storm. My brother lived near Delray Beach, and after a storm, a bunch of these were on the beach. And so these, I think these are what is listed in your textbook as a basket sponge. I have seen these large enough that you could set a person in them, personally, in a little deeper water. Little deeper, maybe 20 feet. I don't go much past about 40 feet and stay in the water. Okay, I get back in the boat. So you know, a little, and then to me, shallow water is between 3 and 10 feet of water. So just so you know what my idea of shallow or deep water is for my snorkeling abilities. And if I say diving, I'm talking about snorkeling. I don't scuba dive. God bless those people that do. I have not that ability or knowledge. So when I mention diving, I'm talking about getting a snorkel and a mask and fins and paddling around and having a great time. Okay? So these would be, now I want you to notice they're full of holes, aren't they? These sponges are full of holes, and you can see where these were attached, can't you? Because sponges don't swim, they don't move around. But as you said, they were filter feeders. And as we look at some of the other sponges, you're going to notice that no matter how weird or different their shapes are, they all are full of holes, aren't they? And actually, the phylum that they're classified in, which under kingdom, then the next division would be phyla. Or a phylum is a singular, phyla is plural. So it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. That's how it goes. And so the phyla, this would be Porifera. Why? Because it's full of pores, holes, right? That's the most logical one I've ever heard. Porifera, full of holes. Yep, this dude's full of holes. And so sponges are all full of holes, and that's because they're filter feeders. They actually take the water in, they filter out the plankton and the tiny little pieces of debris and bacteria and things like that. That's what they eat, and then the water is pumped back out the other side. And all of these sponges, because they are dead, aren't very colorful. But actually in the water, sponges can be extremely colorful. We're going to come back to page 333, but just turn a page to 335 for just a minute. You see some sponges there on page 335, and they can be bright yellow, bright orange, pinks. The purple one there, the lavender tube sponge, I had one of these in my hand 2 weeks ago. It had broken off of the bottom and was in the water still, but shallow right near the beach. I picked it up, I looked at it, but I knew it was still alive, and I know sponges can survive even if they're ripped off the bottom as long as they're still in the water. So I admired it, and then I put it back in the water. It was about this big, you know, a bunch of little tubes hooked together, and it was that color. It was purple, a very pretty color purple. But like I said, and it was good size. It was, you know, good size. It was a chunk of sponge when I picked it up. But I did put it back in the water because I know it's an animal. It's illegal to take sponges that are alive. I would have put it back anyway because you guys all know me. I'm weird. I like to keep things alive as long as I'm not eating them and they're not going to eat me. And so you know, it was beautiful, but it is illegal to take sponges because you have to have a license to take sponges because they protect them now because people have taken so many of them that they're afraid they're going to wipe them out. And so I actually probably took a chance even grabbing the ones off the beach type of thing, because if anybody caught me with them, they might say, well, you must have killed that sponge, which I didn't. And so I figured I was safe that particular day because there were so many sponges all over the beach. I'm sure a lot of people were picking them up. And I wanted them for this purpose, literally, to show you guys. So, and I'm going to warn you right now, even those sponges that you pick up off the beach that are just starting to die, they will stink to high heaven, because it is like having dead fish outside your house while it's, so don't bring it in the house. And it smells very badly because it really is an animal dying in there. Okay? Now, the book tells us that these animals are a colony animal. And turn back to page 333 for just a minute. Let's just look at the cool pictures that are there. On the left-hand side, on page 332, that is actually a picture from John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park, and that is a coral reef. And it's very cool how it's got the, where you can swim underneath it there. And you see soft corals there attached to the hard corals. Actually, I think I'm seeing some sponges up on the top left of that picture, that there are sponges actually attached to that coral. And so that's a very neat thing, and if you get a chance, you definitely should go snorkeling at Pennekamp. You don't have to own a boat to go to the coral reef at Pennekamp. That is the immense beauty of Pennekamp, is that you don't have to go out and make a several $1,000 investment and buy a boat. If your family chooses to go to Pennekamp, there are boats that you can pay as a family to go out on with your mask and snorkel. I'm going to show you a very short clip of that in just a minute, and they'll teach you how to even use the mask and the snorkel if you don't know already. And so if you have relatives in from out of the state or whatever, this is a very cool thing to do. And then they take you right out on the reef, and they give you instruction, and then they'll take you out and let you swim on the coral reef. One of the reefs in Pennekamp that we've been to, the one with the Jesus statue, which a lot of people hear about, that's kind of a deep reef. And we have done that reef once just because we had to conquer it. It was a very rough day. We have a very small boat, and my husband was really amazed that us girls hung in there because we had a long way to go in the boat. Bam! 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 The whole way there, and we're getting soaked, and my husband's going, "Are you sure you girls want to do this?" We're all going, "Yes, we want to see the statue," you know. And so we made it there, and then we had to park way back in our little boat because all the big boats were all parked close, and we had to swim about half a mile over to see it. And at the time, my youngest daughter was a young person, and so I'm helping her as we're getting all the way over because it's in about 20 feet of water, 30 feet of water. Saw a lot of cool stuff, though. Saw squid, saw sharks, saw all sorts of cool stuff on the way. You don't have to worry about sharks usually on a reef because they're grocery shopping. So they're not worried about you. There's so much food for them on the reefs that they live there. And so I usually don't have problems with sharks on reefs, if you're not bleeding, of course, because they're happy, they're fed, they're well fed there. And then as we finally got over, we saw the statue. It's like, okay, the statue. Okay, now we get to go back. And going back the half mile against the current was really interesting. I didn't swim the rest of the day. I was so tired by the time we got back to the boat. I'm like, okay, that was enough of that. But the better for me, and if you get a chance to go to Pennekamp, if you want to do that, that's cool because you'll be on one of those big boats that gets to park really close to the statue. But the other one that I would suggest if you ever go to Pennekamp is go on a tour to Grecian Rocks. And Grecian Rocks, I know that they have tours to that because I've seen the tour ships boats there also. Grecian Rocks is a bank reef, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but you read about that. It's a bank reef, so it's long, over 300 feet long. It's only about 3 feet below the water line, and it's like 7-8 miles out from the shore. But it's only 3 feet below at the top of it. It's really, really shallow at the top of it. And as it goes down, it's beautiful. So it's not so far down. I don't know about you, but I like shallow reefs. I don't want to look 30 feet down and go, oh, that's cool, but I'm not going down there. But when they're right here, you know, then it's like, ooh, I can even go down that far, bloop, 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 you know, and I can look. And so Grecian was very fun, very colorful, and the fish were so tame that honestly my youngest daughter touched a fish. She has this thing about swimming through the fish in the coral reefs because there's so many of them that they're large numbers, and I don't blame her. From the time she was 3 years old, she would swim through the fish in the coral reefs and watch them all part as she was one of them. Well, she gets to Grecian Rocks and she does it, and she's used to the fish moving. This time the fish didn't move. She goes, oh my goodness. And she's touching fish because they were like so used to people, I guess, and you're not allowed to fish there because it's the park. So I guess they're just was really weird. But I love going to Grecian rocks, and so we do try to do that more often now. We've seen the statue now, we're over it. But the God-made stuff is really, really beautiful, and if you get a chance to do that, I would seriously suggest everybody do that. So that's what that picture's of. On the right-hand side of that page, on page 333, you have a candelabrum coral, and those colors are realistic. That is really how colorful these corals can be. They can be reds and oranges and yellows and purples and all sorts of very cool colors. And we're going to talk more about them in just a minute and why they have those cool colors. So if you turn back to page 334 and 35, we have the description of sponges and bryozoans. Now I already told you sponges are in phylum Porifera, and they are animals because they're filter feeders. They do not photosynthesize, they make their own food, and they're full of holes. But it also told us that they were colonial. And that doesn't mean not that kind of colonial, okay? When we're talking about colonial, it means they're made up of a colony. We are not made up of a colony, are we? Well, if you took one of our skin cells or one of our heart cells, that cell would die on its own. Okay, because we are one individual made up of multiple cells, multicellular. A colony, an organism that's made up of colony or a colonial organism, is one that's actually made up of individual cells that if you ripped them apart, they could still live on their own. Isn't that neat? They could still live on their own, and when they get together, they help each other. Now, it told us in the book here that a lot of filter feeders will live as colonies because to be a filter feeder, you have to be really small. And the problem with being really small is somebody bigger is going to want to eat you. And so they get together as colonies because it's better defense against predators when they're in a bigger group so that they look big even though they're individually tiny. Remember I told you that the Portuguese man-o-war that we talked about was a colony of individuals. Now a man-o-war, the jellyfish is actually not a colony. This is an individual organism. So this is not a colony. Yes, the jellyfish wasn't originally this color. They've stained it this color to make it obvious in this paperweight. Okay, so, but it's obvious. So that's why I brought it so you could see the jellyfish in the form. And we're going to talk about this more in a minute. But this is not a colony of animals. This is one animal. If you took pieces of them, they would die. Okay, they would not be able to live on their own. Whereas with the corals and the sponges, they actually said that if you took a sponge and you ran it through a shredder, that the pieces would actually come back together. That's what your book said. And reorganize themselves, which I found very interesting. I know that if you break a piece off of a sponge, it'll grow back. They regenerate. But this makes sense why then if they're colonial, because you're not really doing anything with breaking a piece of the colony off, and that's why they can grow back. Yes?
When a jellyfish is dead, can it still sting you?
Yes, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. We're going to talk about those. Those are coelenterates or cnidarians, and we're going to talk about them in just a minute, okay? Okay, and so the colonies of individuals are self-sustaining. If you rip them apart, they can still live. That's what self-sustaining means. But they do better together in groups. And the colonial animals that we have in this chapter are the sponges and the corals. Mention the sea squirts, and just in case, the sea squirts were back on page 327. On page 327, there was a picture of a sea squirt in your book there. It's the picture on the bottom on page 327, left-hand side. And you notice there's a bunch of different, looks like straw-looking things. Those are individual sea squirts that live together in a colony is why. Okay? So those would be colonial animals. The bryozoas, I looked those up because I don't teach those in biology even, and apparently that's a very old term that covers sponges and corals and a few other things, so that's why you don't see that term as often anymore. Remember, these are man-made classification systems, so they can be called different things depending on the textbook you use. And so I just want you to be aware of that. There's no hard, fast, set way. But bryozoas are animals that are shaped like plants. Now, the book was good about explaining why. Plants are designed to catch sunlight because they have to photosynthesize, right? So God designed them in such a way that they are very efficient at catching sunlight. These are filter feeders, and they look something like plants because they're very well designed to filter the water. Thus, they got the plant thing going on. Just like plants are trying to catch the sunlight, these filter feeders are spread out in such a way to catch their food. Does that make sense? And so that's why some of these bryozoans, these animals that are kind of plant-shaped, it's because of the way that they eat, and they're designed so that they're better able to eat. If you turn over to page 336, there's some more pictures of some different bryozoas, which once again are colonies. The bottom right one, which is E, you can see the polyp shape very nicely there. And so I like that picture just because you can see the little tentacles and stuff. Told us that sponges only live under the water, so if it's someplace where the water level gets too low, unlike an oyster, they die. They have to be below the low tide line. They can be, though, in estuaries where there's low salt, or they can be in marine environments. Most of the sponges that we see around Florida are off of the west coast of Florida or in the Keys. Okay? And so that's your predominant areas for your sponge communities there. On the bottom of page 337, I have seen sponges like that all over the Keys. They get about that big. Okay, and they're in the water, and they look just like that. That's the whole black thing going on with the little hole-looking thing in the middle, and all sorts of critters. Now, this mentioned that a sponge is like a city. It has so many different things living in it, doesn't it? What was something that you read about that happens to live with the sponge, as if the sponge is its home? Do you remember? Can you remember any other critters that lived on the sponge or with the sponge? Yes. Crabs. Shrimp. There's little fish. There's all sorts of little critters that actually eat barnacles. There's all sorts of little critters that actually take up residence and live with the, I'm going to show you a barnacle. I'm going to get gross here. Everybody's got one of these on your table. But it mentioned barnacles. That is a barnacle. That is the shell portion, and what's sticking out there are his legs. Barnacles live on their head and stick their legs out. And then their legs actually catch their food. They're a filter feeder also. And their legs actually catch their food, and then they pull it back in and stuff it in their mouth. And each of you has a barnacle on your table. Barnacles can come in different shapes as far as the shapes of the shell that they produce. But if you get a chance to watch a barnacle next time, the barnacles actually are kicking their little legs out there feeding. Maybe if you're near a dock or something, or a boat that has them on them, you can see them. So sponges actually give homes to many different organisms that live in them, and they're like a community in and of themselves. As they get older, though, they will eventually die, and then the whole community has to find a new home. On page 338, you actually do see the shrimp that we were talking about that lives in the sponge. And at the bottom, you have a picture of a moon jelly. There are a lot of different types of jellyfish. And this is not a moon jelly. This is just a jellyfish. Each of you have a very small jar in front of you that you're not going to be able to see this at home very well. But it's a moon jelly, which looks very similar to, I'd have to hold it this way and then it's floating, so it won't work for you. So it's just not going to work. But the moon jelly looks very much like that picture. And they come in either clear or sometimes a pinkish color, sometimes depending on the species. Yes?
Can they sting you?
Can they sting you? Yes. So let's talk about this. Remember we just said that sponges were in porifera. If we broke this down, this phylum is called porifera, which means it's full of holes, full of pores. Jellyfish, man-o'-wars, sea anemones, corals, all are classified together into, your book on page 338 calls them coelenterate. See if I can spell this right. So the name of that phylum, you don't have to write this down, I just want you to see it, is coelenterata, and they're coelenterates. This word actually means hollow gut, okay, because it's a tube shape, basically. The other name that this phylum will be called by, just an alternate name, which is actually what's used in the biology books that we use, so just an alternate name, is Cnidaria. Cnidaria. And just like knife, you do not pronounce the K, do you? You don't say knife, right? Or knite. It's knife. This is Cnidaria. So when a C is in front of an N, just like a K in front of an N, you don't say it. It's silent. Okay? So this is Cnidaria. Cnidaria means nettles. Now, in this part of Florida, we don't have nettles, I don't think. In North Florida, they do. A nettle is a very pretty little plant with a very pretty little white flower. And you think, oh, isn't that a pretty little flower? And if you touch it, you're going to scratch and burn for hours afterwards. So nettles sting. And that's why some people call these cnidarians, because they have stinger cells. Cnidarians, or coelenterates, what they have in common is their shape. They can have one of two body shapes. They can either be shaped like a polyp, which is the idea of a sea anemone. And all of you have a sea anemone in a specimen of a sea anemone. These are dead. It was asked before, where'd you get these, Mrs. Freites? Remember, I'm the biology teacher. I buy dead things from a place that sells dead things. They call them specimens. They're dead things. Anyway, and so they crack up when I call them too and tell them I need dead things. And they're like, oh my gosh. Anyway, and so that's a dead sea anemone, but it's a polyp. And then the other shape that cnidarians can have is the medusa shape, which the medusa shape is what our jellyfish is. That's our medusa shape. These are the two shapes that cnidarians or coelenterates can have. Now, once again, I don't know about you, but I immediately thought of the Portuguese man-o-war and go, he doesn't have either of those two shapes. Well, but they're a colony. You'd have to get on an individual level and look at them under the microscope, remember. So that's why he's kind of an exception, isn't he? The other thing that cnidarians and coelenterates have is, you notice they all have, what are these? Tentacles. And on their tentacles, they have a special kind of cell called the nematocyst. And you don't have to remember that till you get into biology. But what a nematocyst is, I tell my biology students, it's a poison dart cell. Your book described it as a harpoon cell, didn't it? And it's the idea that if you have this nematocyst in the tentacles, that inside of it there is a harpoon that's waiting to be released, and that's a harpoon on like a tube. And there's a little trigger on these cells. It could be a chemical trigger, it could be a pressure trigger. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Once something releases that trigger, the harpoon shoots out and stabs into whoever, and the little tube is where the poison is pumped through. And then afterwards it pulls it back in and it reestablishes it so it can use it again. So can a jellyfish sting you? Yes, the tentacles can sting you. If you touch the top of the jellyfish, you're fine. But I wouldn't play with jellyfish personally. And I'm told that, now this is a Florida science class, but I'm told in Australia there's actually jellyfish that can kill you. So you want to be really careful and don't mess with them. But it's the tentacles that we have to concern ourselves with. The polyps of the sea anemone are actually the trigger on a sea anemone is a chemical trigger, not a pressure trigger. See, the jellyfish is a pressure trigger. Anybody touches it, it goes off, okay, like a gun. The chemical trigger on a sea anemone is actually done to a chemical that's in the slime layer of fish. And that particular amino acid, that particular chemical, is not in the slime layer of the clownfish, like Nemo and Finding Nemo. And so because of that, the clownfish is able to live in the sea anemone without worrying about it because it doesn't have the chemical to trigger the harpoons. And so he doesn't get hit or stung. But we might. It just depends. I don't think sea anemones will get us because we don't necessarily have that particular amino acid in our skin, but I wouldn't take a chance. And that's just like corals. Corals are polyps. And then the corals, whether they're a soft coral that waves or a hard coral that's a stony coral, they're made up of polyps and colonies. And if you touch these tentacles, some of them will burn you. Fire coral will burn you. There are some corals that if you brush up against, you're going to be hurting afterwards. And because there's so many different species, you just need to be careful because you kill them anyway if you touch them. So it's better not to touch them. And they do produce, we're going to talk about it, they produce a mucus layer to actually protect themselves also. So cnidarians, or coelenterates, all have one of these two body shapes in general, and on their tentacles, they have these nematocysts, or these harpoon-type poison dart cells. I want to just show this to you real quickly. We are looking at the cnidarian hydra. This is under 40 power as it comes in to focus. It is macroscopic, so it doesn't all fit on the screen at once. Please notice that the tentacles are on this end with the mouth. And then as we go down the polyp, that is the bud right there, budding off. So down here would be our basal disc, where it actually attaches itself. Once again, we go up, there's our bud, there's its tube-shaped polyp body, and then up in between these tentacles would be its mouth. Okay, let's focus in now. We're still at 40 power. We're getting on the tentacle because we're going to try to look at the nematocysts. We go up to 100 power, and you can see the little black spots in some of these. This is at 400 power, and here we're actually seeing the nematocysts, and the dark portions are probably the little poison darts that would shoot out. Possibly part of that would be the trigger. Also, remember the pressure trigger that's involved here. Corals are cnidarians, and once again, you have, let me show you some skeletons of coral, and that's all these are, stony corals, skeletons. So the polyps, the little guys, used to live inside of here, and they built little stone houses that they lived in while they were alive. And then when they died, the next guy built a little stone house, and you can see the little holes that they used to live in. And that's what those holes represent. And there are different shapes and types of coral. And they all, though, now these are all stony corals that I have here. This sea fan was a soft coral, and they actually are full of polyps. And then in the beginning picture of the last chapter, in the middle of the grass seafloor, it had a soft coral, which actually goes like this. There's sea whips, there's sea feathers. Some of them just look real feathery. They're full of these little polyps. Let me give you an idea. Turn over to page 342. On the top left of page 342, it says native to Florida's Keys, and this is a pillar coral. That's actually a coral, and the bluish color there is all the little polyps. It almost looks hairy, doesn't it? Well, if you got down next to it and looked at it, you would see all the little polyps. And this is what I'm a nut for, because after I studied these the first time, every time I go to the reef now, I'll tell my kids, come on, let's go look at the polyps. And that's why I like those shallow reefs, because you can dive right down and get right next to the ones that are going like this, and you can see all the little guys like this with all their little tentacles, can't you? And they're out there, and they're just so cool because they're busy doing their filtering thing. Now, if you get too close, they go, and they pull in because they're going, ooh, somebody's going to mess with me. And if you stand there and you wait for them, they'll eventually go again, and they start doing their thing again, which is very, very cool. And they all, are attached so that if you did brush up against it, they all shut at once. You're not supposed to brush up against it, though. It's actually illegal.
If exploring the only living coral reef in the continental United States is your idea of a great outdoor adventure, you'll find it off U.S. Highway 1 in Key Largo. The real wilderness here is underwater.
This reef is a very, very shallow reef. You're going to have to treat it a lot like a wall. You swim up to the reef and you work back and forth on this side of the reef. You don't want to touch the coral because it can kill it. It's very, very fragile. There's actually fines just for standing up out here. If a sanctuary officer catches you just standing up in the light-colored sandy areas, they can give you a $50 fine just for standing. Now, if you stand on the coral and damage any of it, obviously the fine's going to go up a lot. So if you get tired, come back to the boat, or just blow that vest up and you can float and relax out in the water, okay?
The one nice thing about snorkeling is you don't have to have any formal training beforehand. As long as you have some understanding on how to swim, that's all we ask. We can get you snorkeling in a matter of just a few moments. We do a little snorkel class. Okay, welcome to Snorkel 101, guys. And it's a great refresher for those who are snorkelers that haven't been in a long time. we cover the basics and get
scissor kicks just like
the pure
this.
novice
Like
in the water, snorkeling like a pro
freestyle.
by the end of the day. And it's a fun experience, and it's great for families. Here in the Florida Keys, you can see a large variety of different species of fish and sea life. We have over 650 different varieties of fish here in the Keys. And if you've never seen coral in real life, there's no match the beauty that is actually there in real life.